Round 4 of Shamkir Chess 2015 took place today. First up, let's look at the game between Vladimir Kramnik with the white pieces against Viswanathan Anand, two old adversaries. They reached this position after 25 moves, and Kramnik now played knight g6. Now, before I say anything about this position, you might like to pause the video and just think how you would play here with the black pieces. Okay, I've given you time to do that. Now, let's take a look at black's options. Well, first up, there's a threat to take on e7 and then take on c6, winning a piece. Black could try rushing the pawns forward with b4 anyway, and probably knight takes bishop does win, but probably the clearest move is to play knight e5, threatening knight d7 check, as well as knight takes c4 and a couple of other threats. So b4 isn't working here. You might have thought about bishop d6, removing the bishop from the threat of the knight and also covering the e5 square. Now Kramnik has a very powerful move, f4. The knight wants to return to e5, and if b4, well, you can see how powerful this move is. The knight threatens knight d7 check and knight takes c4, and if this is taken, then the king has to step backwards into a pin, and bishop takes c6 is winning. The point is that if c3, white exchanges and takes on b7 with the bishop, that's important. And now if c2, then a discovered check, and bishop takes pawn, so white is winning. So the situation looks difficult for black, but there is a saving move which Anand managed to find. c5. It needs a bit of calculation. First of all, let's see what happens if white plays knight takes bishop. Then black does not recapture, but instead plays bishop takes e4. And this is winning for black, because if pawn takes pawn, then in this case, that's too dangerous for white. In the race, black is always going to win, because when a pawn hits the back rank, it's going to be checkmate. So in this position, Kramnik had to compromise, and he just played rook takes bishop, and the players exchanged down into a drawn opposite coloured bishop ending, and after some exchanges, yeah, the players agreed to draw. A tense little contest. Okay, let's move on and look at the game between Michael Adams with the white pieces against Magnus Carlsen. This started out as a Spanish. The Smyslov variation with g6 was played by Carlsen, and well, it's been such a strategically rich game, very interesting indeed. You can see that Carlsen has this protected passed pawn on e4, but he's also got a backward d pawn, and having advanced his kingside pawns, his king can sometimes be a little bit exposed. There's no pawn cover, but he does have so many pieces packing the kingside, so there's no immediate danger for black's king. Well, Adams typically has a very harmonious piece position. Rooks look nice. These knights are looking at this pawn on f5, and the bishop stands well on c3. Very tricky position. Carlsen played knight e8 after, well, over 12 minutes thought. The knight protects the pawn on d6, and Carlsen is very much hoping that Adams will simply exchange, and that will bring his rooks to a very nice position on the g file, and perhaps following up with rook g4, and that knight on h4 and the pawn on f4 look rather loose. But Adams wasn't so obliging and played knight h5, hitting the bishop. which now exchanged off on c3. Now a reflex move would simply be to recapture with the rook, but actually this would be strategically a huge mistake, because suddenly that knight would find its way to d4, wonderful square on d4, and that would really, I think, be pretty disastrous for white. But Adams played pawn takes, which looks extremely ugly with these double pawns, but is absolutely the correct decision. So the pawn covers d4. It also opens the b file. That could be significant, particularly as black's king is so exposed. Well, let's look at, for example, knight c6, a careless move. Knight g3. Sometimes it can be nice just to trade here and to break through in the middle. Knight c7, and now rook b1, and suddenly this rook has possibilities to enter on the b file. d6 looks a little bit weak. The game would be turning in white's favour. So in this position, Carlsen appreciated that he really needed to take care. He thought for over 31 minutes on this position, and he came up with an excellent idea. He doesn't like to drift, and he found a very straightforward plan. He played rook g4, attacking the knight, which has to be defended. Now there's no point in leaving this rook on g4. Well, for example, if you try to switch this round here, say rook f8, and perhaps looking at this idea, then rook b1 is excellent, coming straight down to b7, and you can see how dangerous that is. But this was never Carlsen's intention. He sacrificed the exchange and then played knight g6. It's so interesting how the initiative switches sides from one move to the next. Here, if Adams is too greedy and protects that pawn, then this pawn rolls forward, and this is very dangerous. So, for example, queen g3, greedily hanging on to that pawn. Then knight g7, and after that exchange, then black's king and queen will be in trouble. Remember, that queen could land on e4 at any moment. Adams played king h1, good move. Carlsen took on h4. Now this looks very dangerous with the knight coming to f3. But Adams had this under control. After knight f3, the rook came to g3. So already there's a threat to take that knight because of the pin to the queen. Adams dealt with that. Carlsen dealt with that by protecting the queen. That also gives the queen a square to attack the knight. Rook d1. The rook may, under some circumstances, hit d5. Queen f7, attacking the knight, so the rook came to h3. Rook e6. Now, as the rook has left the 7th rank, then white's rook came here. That might sometimes be threatening or menacing. Rook g6. Rook g3. Now there's no longer a threat to the knight. The rook can come back into play. And now rook e6. First it looks as though perhaps black should play knight g7, and there's a forcing sequence here. If knight takes knight, queen takes, now queen takes. Hitting two pawns. I'm sure that Carlsen calculated this. By the way, having had that big think, Carlsen was now actually running short of time. He could have played like this, but I think he appreciated that his king would potentially be in some danger, and you know, these endgames could be very good for white, with that rook on the rampage taking pawns. I mean, black is still probably okay here, but it's tricky, and you know, black's king could be in some danger here. Carlsen decided not to chance that. I think that's probably a correct decision when he's short of time. Instead he played rook e6. So the queen attacks the knight, the rook came back again. Well, rook g6 could result in a draw, but Carlsen played rook e7, so covering the 7th. And Adams repeated, and Carlsen repeated, and so on. I mean, both sides could have tried to play on, but I think they were correct in just repeating the position here. Too risky for either side to go for a win. So a very complex draw. Adams actually has a pretty good record against Carlsen with the white pieces, 50%. With black he's not so successful, but with white, very steady. And I think Carlsen has respect for him. Of course, Adams was asked by Carlsen to be one of his seconds during the recent World Championship match, or to do some training with him beforehand. Let's look at the one decisive game in round 4. Wesley So against Rauf Mamedov from Azerbaijan. Mamedov, clearly the weakest player in the tournament, and Wesley So was on fine form again today. You can see that So has a queenside pawn majority, and he exploited this brilliantly. c5. First of all, he pushes as far as he can with his queenside pawns. King f6. Now the black king threatens to come in, so white has to match that. Well, Wesley wants to bring his king forward anyway. Bishop e8. There's not a lot that black can do here. And the bishop comes to this excellent diagonal. The rook protects the pawn. Now, it's not so easy for white to make progress, or at least he's made all the progress he can. He can't advance this pawn because the bishop is on looking at the b5 pawn. Therefore, Wesley brings the king over. Good move. It all happens so easily. King c4. Now the b5 pawn is defended. It's possible to keep rolling with the queenside pawns. g4 from Mamedov. Well, there are many moves that win here. You could just nudge back with the bishop, and white is still, I think, in a winning position. But instead, Wesley played, well, he didn't rush it. He just played very energetically. This is very strong. So black doesn't have time to take the bishop. The rook is en prise. The rook moved. The king is pushed to the side. And now again, you could move this bishop, but Wesley has calculated very well. He pushes the pawn. This has to be taken. And this forces the bishop exchange. And white now has a winning rook and pawn endgame. Well, it's a typical position. If the rook goes behind, then white's rook is in the best position, and now all white needs to do is follow up with his king, and followed by king a7, and white wins the rook. Beautiful performance by Wesley. It looks very simple, but actually, well, he calculated very well. He knew exactly what to do. After 4 rounds, Wesley So is in sole lead with 3.5 out of 4. Carlsen is in second with 3. Vladimir Kramnik in third on 2.5. Anand and Maxime Vacher-Lagrave on 2 points.